what we've tried to very strongly do at the Milan Guardian is to make health issues accessible and compelling to read about. Now, we don't view health as something that's just medical or scientific. We look at social issues like, injuries from circumcision, traditional circumcision. We look at cultural issues like Butwala, or mental disabilities in a cultural context. We don't just do medical stuff. But you can't report on health, and ignore the medical side and the policy side and the science side. And when you tell stories about those issues, it's issues that's very, very hard to absorb. No one wants to read a story with a lot of interesting data but not be able to absorb it or make sense of it if it's too much data. And no one really wants to just read about a policy and not understand how it relates to them. So what we try to do is to incorporate narrative journalism. And by narrative journalism, I don't mean starting with a sort of a human case study and have a paragraph that you describe the case study and there off you go to the data. I mean a type of journalism that sort of incorporates the elements that you'll find in a novel or a short story. So suspense, descriptions of environment, a very good beginning, middle and end, a story reaching a climax. And the difference between that and a short story or novel would be that ours would be based on reality, and our stories would incorporate data and policy issues that would not necessarily be in a short story. Our top story at the Milan Guardian is on HIV, the subject that everyone says is boring and can't be read about anymore. We've had 14,000, this week we still had 400 readers more on the story. It was a story by one of our reporters, Ines Kusana, and it was written in a narrative way. It was about 1,500 words, and it talked about a middle-class woman with HIV and how she negotiates social relationships. When do you tell someone when you're positive? Do you still have sex? Do you date? How do you do it? And it also incorporated an American actor with HIV. Our fourth top story was about a very technical issue. It focused on, you remember Sylvia Lucas that bought all the KFC and the fast food in Northern Cape Premier? So we used her to talk about the government's policy on non-communicable diseases. It released a new policy, potentially extremely boring to read about. We used that story of Sylvia Lucas to tell the story about, we focused on fast food and what the impact of fast food is on non-communicable diseases. By non-communicable, I mean things like diabetes, lifestyle diseases, cancer, obesity, and heart diseases, basically. And as a result of it, it's still increasing. We got almost 10,000 readers, which is extremely high for a niche story at the Milan Guardian. It got a lot of hits, and it also got a lot of Facebook recommendations and tweets. I think it had about 400 Facebook recommendations. Normal for us is about between 30 and 40 for a main body story in the Guardian. All these stories were written in narrative styles. They all had a lot of data in them that you would generally otherwise not want to read. They had policy issues in, but they all had a human face, and I don't mean just one case study that the story is told about. I mean several of them. They contain conflict, and we all know that conflict is a very strong news value, right? As soon as you have someone saying something and someone disagrees, the news value goes up. They were all very long. They were all between 1,500 words and 3,800 words. And the main body of the Milan Guardian story would sort of be 750 words, right? And they all had high readership figures. As soon as a story is a narrative story, the readership figures double, and it doesn't matter how long that story is. The lessons that we've learned at Bhekisisa is that readers, it's not true that people don't want to read about technical issues or science or policy, but they only want to read about it when it's made accessible. When they sort of think they're reading about case studies, but actually they're reading about the data. They don't mind how long a story is, they don't care. A story can be 3 pages, as long as it's compelling and it's understandable and it has strong characters in it. And we've also learned that it doesn't matter how good your grasp is on technical issues. If your story does not make the science or the data accessible, and most often that means does not have a human face, people are not going to read it. We can no longer argue, that it's well written. And for me, it's about at our help desk is, are people going to read the story or not? If they're not going to read it, I don't want it.